Start the recording now. All right, let's start this thing, shall we?
Let's go.
All right, letting everyone in now. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I see some new names, and I also see some familiar names. So it's just nice to see everyone. Before we jump right into the conversation, as always, I just want to introduce myself to the people that may be joining us for the first time. I am Jasmine. I am the program manager of RevTech Labs, as well as the moderator for this series. So a little bit about the Unlearning series, if you were joining us for the first time. Essentially, we just pivoted around these critical conversations around certain things that are hard to talk about, such as race, leadership, gender. And then today's topic, talking with some people that were formerly incarcerated and just being able to bridge the gap between the communications amongst people that really don't talk to people outside of their circles. So I just want to thank all of you for joining us for these really important conversations. I know at some points they could probably get uncomfortable, just because we're talking about things that are typically taboo. So again, just very appreciative that all of you showed up today for today's topic. So with all of that being said, let's go ahead and get started. We have Andrew McKenna and Kenneth Robinson joining us, the co-founders of Fighting Missionaries. We'll talk about that a little bit later on once we start the conversation. But as always, let's start off with some icebreaker questions just so you all can get to know them on a more fun, personal note. So gentlemen, are you ready for some icebreaker questions?
Yes, we are ready.
All right,
Sure.
Perfect. All right, first question. What is your favorite strange food combination?
Olives and butter pecan, Haagen-Dazs butter pecan ice cream.
Okay.
The olives, I take an olive, get salty, then hit the ice cream. That's my combo. Try it.
All right, I'll try it. Andrew.
I like toasted peanut butter and bacon sandwiches.
That seems a little less odd than the olives. I probably would
less.
try that over pennies any day. All right, next question. One of my favorites. If you were a potato, what way would you like to be cooked?
I think the way that I probably stay half baked.
Okay. Good answer.
I'd stay half drunk. No. Okay.
It's gonna be a great
don't know.
conversation.
I think I don't know. I'd have to go with mashed potatoes, I guess.
Okay. Generic, but definitely a fan favorite.
Yeah.
Would you go to space if you knew that you could never come back down to Earth? Are you next?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
I'd be on the next flight.
Now I'll be on the next flight back. Every time I go on anywhere, I'm looking forward to coming back.
Okay. Interesting. If you could give a piece of advice to your younger self, what would it be?
Man, just keep swinging at it. There's some times, where I put the bat down. Had given up, earlier in life. Different times along this struggle. It's been times where I just put the bat down. It's been times where I threw the bat. You get mad, right? You keep swinging and missing. You'll get mad and you'll throw the bat. I've done that, right? So I would just tell my younger self, man, keep swinging at him. You will hit eventually.
I like that.
I guess I would tell my young self that just because you're thinking it doesn't mean it's true, especially as it relates to yourself. Self-esteem, sort of the negative self-talk. Just because, as a young kid, you think it. I used to think that automatically it was real, it was true. And it took me until I was an adult to really realize that that's not the case. I wish I'd had known that more as a child coming up.
Those are really great answers. And then to end on a high note, what is one thing you are doing right now that most people don't typically do to change the world? I know that was a loaded question, so if I have to repeat it, I will.
Now, that's an easy question for me. Then that's a 2-word answer for me, right? And that is the work, right? You can talk about this stuff all you want to, but you do have to do the work, right? And that makes the difference, and especially the work that we're doing and the change that's needed in this world, right? Some of us have to come up out of our comfort zones and come on out there and do the work like me and Dan did, planting flowers. And we don't be doing no physical work, but we did that day. Yeah.
Well, it took me a long time to get to this point because the focus for me was always on myself. And actually, Kenny helped me a lot with this. We can talk about that more here shortly, but you know, no major huge thing, but I think it's, you know, trying to put my focus outward more, whether it's with my own children, with close relationships, friends, but more so now than ever with strangers, and just showing people that they're worthy and that they're loved and supported. And I'm not perfect at it by any means, but I think that's something that I'd like to see become more typical. I don't think it is typical, and I work at it a little bit every day. As I said, with regard to that, I'm getting into the game kind of late. It was always the focus was on myself.
Mm-hmm. I think those are really great answers. Thank you, gentlemen. So that just wraps up the icebreaker little section that we do for these calls. So just to now just dump right into today's conversation. Let's start with Kenny. Kenny, if you want to just start us off, give a brief actually, I just had a thought, and I don't think I said it at the beginning. Everyone that is watching from obviously your computers, if you do have any questions along the way, feel free to drop them in the chat. We will definitely get around to them. We typically try to open up at the last 15 minutes of the event to see if there are any Q&As. But if you do have a question along the way, definitely put it in the chat, and we will try to get it answered for you. All right, so with that said, Kenny, if you want to go ahead and start us off, give a brief introduction of who you are, your current ventures that you're working on. Yeah, what do you do? Tell us a little bit about it yourself.
All right, I am Kenny Robinson, and I am 42 years old and the father of 6 children, 5 girls and 1 boy, and the grandfather of 6 children, 4 girls and 2 boys. My oldest daughter is 26 and my youngest daughter is 7. So I have 5 children that are grown between the ages of 21 and 26. And then I have 1 daughter that's 7 years old, and she is the vice president of Freedom Fighting Missionaries. I spend the majority of my time helping others. That's what I enjoy doing. That's like a profession and a hobby. Right, so I enjoy the work that I do. I don't have much time for sports or leisure activities, because when I try to do those things, I'm thinking of the things that I would rather be doing, which is normally helping others. And that doesn't mean like an action always. Sometimes it's just a conversation. Sometimes people just need that, right? And that is also how I relax and unwind too. Just talking to, like Andrew said, strangers, right? I know who I can talk to for certain things, but you don't know what you're going to get from a stranger in a conversation. And that is me personally. I have been married twice, right? So I'm going to keep swinging at that too until I land the right one. So personally, I am originally from Hempstead, New York on Long Island. My family was on my father's side was from here in North Carolina. So that's how I transferred here when I was a youth. So with me being the age that I am at 40, 42 years old, that would have made me a 8, 9, 10 years old in the 80s, right? So it was some pretty rough times. So during those times to get down south, right? Because this was down south if you're from the north, that was, maybe supposed to help you or save you from some of the things that were going on in New York at the time. But of course, the crack epidemic was, nationwide, and no town or city was spared from that. So that is the lifestyle that I came up in. According to what's down on paper, I have a ninth grade education, which means I completed the ninth grade before they put me out of high school completely and told me my only option was to get a GED. Um, and I did that. I went over to the community college when I was 16, signed up to take the GED test. I scored so high then they said you can take the test. I took the test and I scored the highest, in that cycle. And they offered me to go to college at that time. So I went over to the community college for a semester. Meanwhile, I'm still, in my crack dealing endeavors, right, as all of this is going on. So people were coming back from some of the colleges and universities saying that it was a party there, right? Some of these Black colleges, that it was a party. So when I was 17, I dialed 411 and signed up to go to a historically Black university. Meanwhile, by now, at the time I was 17 years old, I'm already now selling kilograms of cocaine by then. And I went off to the university, went in school, went to class every day, took the class serious until the streets ended up catching up with me. And now I am here. I went away at the age of 24, serving a 10-year sentence. Served that sentence and was released at 34. When I got out here in Charlotte, North Carolina in 2012, again, on paper, this is what it says about me. And again, on paper, it says that I have limited skills and I never had a job and all of those things, right? Here in Charlotte, where it's tough at anyway, right? The bottom of the barrel here in Charlotte when you're coming out of poverty. And then to be Black and have a background on top of it, limited skills and a GED was pretty rough. So 40 interviews I went on in the first 3 months and 40 times I got told no straight in a row before I got my first job, which was at Goodwill making minimum wage. And I needed to support 5 children in immediate need with that. And immediate need is tampons and, bra, food, immediate things that you need to survive, right? Even with all those adversities, I kept on pushing. I read 1,000 books while I was locked up. And one of them, my most favorite book, The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino, teaches persistence, right? And keep on pushing and not giving up and be determined and hang in there. So I believed in that and I activated that, used that. And at some point stopped going into these warehouses that was telling me no. And I eventually went into a car dealership and I took some training there, begged them for a job. They gave it to me. I took it very serious because here's someone who's never had the internet before, right? Now I have my own desk for 9, 10 hours a day with access to the internet. My reading comprehension is good enough to understand what I read. So I did a lot of training. I soaked up a lot of information sitting there at my desk. And I became a top salesperson there in 6 months, and then a top salesperson for that brand in Charlotte within a year. And I was promoted up to finance manager and sales manager, worked at different brands, Honda, BMW, Kia, Hyundai. And once I became a manager, then that gave me the ability to hire others, right? And my boss, right, they own a lot of dealerships and they like to make money, right? And since I was making them a lot of money working there, when I hand them a piece of paper now, they sign it because they trust the money that I make them, right? So I'm now able to hire people with a background. right? Because people saw me on social media and they say, oh, look, we know this guy and what he used to be. Look at him now. Okay, can you help my son, my mother, my dad, my niece? Can you help them? They're getting out, or they have this background from 17 years ago, can't get out of Bojangles and they need a better job. Can you help them? Right? And that is how I started helping people. So in January of 2020, keep in mind, my children are now grown, right? So I don't have that financial responsibility to them. So even though I was making well over $100,000 ever since I started in the car business, I walked away from that, retired from that in January of 2020 to start my nonprofit. So I took my savings and my 401k and went out on the adventure to start my own nonprofit, not knowing that coronavirus was coming, that they were going to murder and slaughter George Floyd like so, and all of the other things that happened in election year. So where I had a plan to start assisting 3 to 5 individuals, that quickly jumped to 30 and 50, and then 50 to 100 individuals with numerous needs, homelessness, and things that were associated with the pandemic and poverty and just being Black in Charlotte. Of course, when you're a new nonprofit, even though it's a pandemic and civil unrest in an election year that you can clearly see, well, we're still working under the old structures, right? The old way of doing things that says that, well, you need to be vouched for and you need your CPA audited financials, and you should have been in existence for 3 years before we'll give you $5,000 to help your nonprofit run. So I went through that, petitioning the state, the local government, the city, the federal government for help, right? Because I have this lady with me with 3 kids and they've given her a tent to stay in tonight because the shelter was full. And I just want to put her in a hotel for a few days, right? So there was no help for us to do that. We had the crowd fund to do that, which means that the city of Charlotte and the residents of Mecklenburg County, they pitched in to support us $5 and $10 and $15, $20 at a time, until for the year of 2020, we raised nearly $200,000 from this community, right? Because they didn't want to see their people in tents. And they know that what it's like when we get out of jail, we have nowhere to go and we have nothing. And the community responded. Along that journey of building this nonprofit to assist formerly incarcerated with the emphasis of those who have a disability along with their background. And they're Black, which can be an impediment, especially in Charlotte, North Carolina, right? Just to be born here and be born Black is almost a crime. And the statistics state that you're at the bottom of this nation to move forward, to come out of that there's almost no chance that you'll come out of that in Charlotte, North Carolina. So to have a criminal background and a disability attached to that, well, you'll find yourself in a tent or under a bridge in Charlotte, North Carolina, if that's the case. And maybe someone will give you my number and I can fundraise to put you in a hotel for a week or so while we try to get you some resources. Then that's the work that we do. Well, let me hear the Packer Place is that work, right? Mm-hmm. That I'm in the uptown area where the jail is here uptown, right? And the bus station is here uptown. And the train station is here. And the pedestrians are here uptown. And I need a location here uptown. Right. So I petitioned to 37 different business owners here because we know that everybody's working from home, right? Nobody's even here. Right? Everybody's working from home. So can we please use your office space so we can assist people and help them, right? So they don't have to sleep on the streets. And out of all of those places, I only got one response, and that came from Packer Place that did offer to let us in and to use the space that we use now, which has a profound impact. I can talk on and on, so we have to get to some of these questions. That is me and Freedom Fighting Missionaries, and that is what we do. We assist the formerly incarcerated. Assistance means, how do you design this program? Well, I designed it this way, to navigate our people around the frustrations, right? And guide them towards employment that will hire you with the background, right? Guide you towards healthcare that will accept you without Medicaid and accept the fact that you don't have insurance, and you won't be able to pay this, right? And guide you towards resources that are friendly to you, and guide you around all of the places that will make you feel worse, right? And make depression set in, right? And then that makes my job harder. If you're discouraged and everybody's told you no that I sent you to, you're going to start feeling like there's no help for you. So the biggest part is to guide you around all of these things and send you to places that will help you and train to help you.
Most definitely. That was a hell of an introduction, Kenny.
Yes, I'm
Thank you.
sorry.
Like virtual round of we might as well just end the show now. No, I'm just kidding. Andrew, feel free to take it away. Introduce yourself.
Wow. Hard to go after that. So, I grew up in upstate New York, middle class kid. My parents were together. My father was a college professor. My mom was a middle school teacher. 3 older siblings. I was the troublemaker of the family, the youngest. And I knew at an early age that I was thinking, at least I thought I was thinking differently than a lot of my peers. Everybody seemed to be very comfortable and, doing all the right things and moving along. I went to a high school. There were 3 Black kids that went to the high school. One happens to still be my best friend. Not that that's really relevant, but we just got together recently after about 12 years. And he's got a lot of sobriety time behind him. And I know Kenny and I follow each other on social media, and we do a lot of stuff together. But anyway, it was great to see him. But I grew up in a little bit of a bubble, and I got out. I left high school. I quit high school. I used the excuse that I was bored as hell, but I don't think it was so much being bored, because I'm not like a super smart guy. It just wasn't working for me, I guess. And went off, joined the military, went to college. We'll bring this up a little bit here, but everybody in my family just assumed you went to college. It wasn't even like a question. I guess I could have said I didn't want to, but it was part of my ontology, really, that was going to be part of my life. And when we start talking about differences in races and socioeconomic parameters and things, that's definitely one of those things I'll bring up. But anyhow, so I went on and joined the military for 4 years as an enlisted man. I was stationed out in Hawaii, 18 years old, single, great shape, having fun. It was, I went on a literal tear for like 4 years, and then realized that, I wanted to get my undergraduate degree. So I went forth with that. Didn't know what to do with my life. So I decided to apply to law school. Great thing about law school is if you apply and get in, then you don't have to worry about your life for 3 years, because you're locked into school. I went from there, became a captain in the Marine Corps, Judge Advocate General. Went from there to the Justice Department, the Criminal Division, Washington, D.C. I was a Special Assistant U.S. Attorney, prosecuting cases all over the world, narcotics trafficking and money laundering. And my career was progressing at a fairly good clip. But one of the things that was holding me back my entire life was addiction. And when I talked about earlier, not really feeling comfortable in my own skin at a very young age, I took that into my adulthood, ended up self-medicating a lot. I had hurt my back in the Marine Corps during a training exercise. I got out, went to DOJ in Washington, went to a civilian doctor. He started prescribing me Percocet as much as I wanted, which is the last thing a guy like me needs to hear, because I kept calling him for refills. And then that led to other medications, again, performing at a very high level, but internally feeling very, not how I appeared outwardly was not how I was feeling inwardly. And so that continued. Ended up handling some pretty big cases at DOJ. And then my addiction kind of took over. Ended up leaving under strange circumstances, which we don't have time for here. Moved back to New York, got a job at a law firm, started doing OxyContin, which we now know as heroin in a pill. I'd never done it before. When that ran out, I went through significant withdrawals. My life sort of started to crumble. All that depression, untreated depression and anxiety and addiction caught up with me. Went through a horrible divorce and custody battle, and became severely depressed, despondent, angry. Ended up robbing 6 banks. I ended up going to prison for 65 months. And remember that number, because this is going to become relevant in the story here as we go further in our conversation. 65 months, 6 banks. Kenny, 10 years. Okay. And I go to prison. Never been to prison before. I was in the brig in the military for like a week, but it nothing to do with anything other than it was like a fight or something. So brand new world to me. Went from federal prosecutor to federal prisoner. And who do I meet in prison? Well, I meet Kenny, right? And the races typically don't mix in prison. Kenny and I were outliers. I remember looking across the squad bay one day. We were part of the program called Life Connections program, one of the few decent programs that the Federal Bureau of Prisons has. And I said, something different about old Kenny. And he and I started talking, hanging out a bit, walking the yard, occasionally eating together. And it was through this process that I learned a lot about myself. And I learned a lot about race. I learned a lot about the assumptions that I had somehow grown up with, about different races, about my own race, and my place in society and other people's places in society. And the way that it unraveled, the way I should say not unravel, but the way it was revealed to me, I owe the vast majority of that to Kenny. And I'm Irish, so I get emotional. I'll cry here in a second, but I owe him a lot of understanding. And it changed my way of thinking. And I had no idea that I'd grown up with these ideas in my mind. They're very, very subtle. And, we'll talk about white privilege here shortly. But so just to end up my quick bio, while I was in, I did a lot of journaling. And the journals turned into, like, I don't have them around me, but into these composition books that they give you off the commissary. And after, 5.5 years or whatever, I mean, I had a stack of them. I got out, and a friend picked one up, read one of my journals, and he goes, "Jesus, man, it's a terrible, terrible story." And I was like, "Yeah, well, I was 9 when that happened." But so then the next story was funny. So it turned into a book. So then the book, Sheer Madness, gave me a platform to start speaking, and it got me into some different media, some national media opportunities to talk about addiction. It was right around the time of the opioid epidemic. Kenny and I had stayed in touch, close contact, since we'd both gotten out right around the same time. We ended up going on TV together. And then, as I said, I credit a lot of the change in my understanding of our world, no other way to put it, to Kenny. And he's a brilliant man, maybe the top 3 brilliant people I know. He doesn't want to hear that. He'll argue, but it is what it is. So I figured out, I said, Kenny, we got to figure out a way to work together. We got to put our resources together. And you know, ever since we met that, you know, in prison, and we became really quite close friends, like brothers. You know, we figured out a way to work together. And so that's kind of what brings me here.
Yeah, that's amazing. I have to say, just quickly, I think both of you just gave like two of the best introductions that we have had on the series up to date. So thank you for that. Thank you for just being thorough and candid and authentic, both of you. And I know, Andrew, you were touching on it a little bit. So, I mean, perfect way to just segue into it. But, you know, talk more about those unconscious biases that you were recognizing that you had when you got to prison, and talk about how your idea of white privilege, how that shifted for you.
Well, I had to help him to recognize those things, right? Because he didn't even know that they existed. Right? When you don't even know that these things exist, right? It sounds crazy to somebody to say these things to you, especially in the way that I would say them to them, right? And I would be having conversations with Drew and some guys like him, like, wait a minute, do you think that you just was so smart in school? You went through high school, graduated, you were so smart, worked so hard that you earned your way over into Purdue, right? Then you got there and you did so well there, right? That you earned your undergraduate and you earn your way into this, right? Right. And see, when you don't know, you think that, well, I did work hard. I went there every day, I tried. And even though my dad, was alumni there, donated a lot of money to that school, helped me and my friends get in there, I still had to go there and work hard, right? So I had to unravel some of these things for him, right? And let him know, well, in a comparison to me, right? How did you work so hard? And right, well, all that you earned, right? Your mother and your father were there and over on Happy Street, providing for you and guiding you along the way, right? And that their parents had did the same thing for them, right? So how could you earn all of these things compared to me? And I should just lift myself up by my bootstraps, Andrew, right? And
okay, ready? I
just
have
like
to jump
you.
in. Jasmine, this did not just happen years ago when we were walking the yard. Okay, all right, you're friends with Kenny now? Okay, you got a lifelong teacher. All right, you don't know it, but you do. All right, so we had that exact same conversation probably a year and a half ago, because I still, even though what I learned in prison and what I saw around me, and as Kenny explained, you know, at that point, I'm thinking this is his side of the story. I still have my own side of the story. And I'm stubborn, so I still have a little bit of my own side of the story. But these conversations are evolving just as my understanding of the bigger problem is evolving, you know, and I want that to continue to evolve. And so before we started at 5 o'clock, what I said to you, Jasmine, in terms of listeners, if you take something away, if you think you got it figured out, you know what, just keep examining, because number one, you know, the unexamined life is not worth living, right? So continuing on with that, I've learned more and more in which is great to learn, you know, and to understand something intellectually. But until I was able to do that, then I was able to, I'm hoping, help Kenny affect the change that he has essentially grown and developed. You know, he's brought me along for this, okay? Not the other way around by any means. Right. But that sense of evolving and continuing to understand is so critical. So what happens with me? Exactly that. I grow up, as I said, I'm expected to go to college, right? I'm expected to do okay on the SAT. I'm expected to do okay in you know, elementary school, middle school, high school, you know? I'm expected to not really ever go hungry, never missed a meal, you know, never had to go to school after, you know, my parents, our house, we didn't get the cops called on our house at night, right? I had other white friends who did have that, but I didn't have that. I thought you went to school the next day well rested, well fed, you know, people at home paying attention to you, not a lot of chaos, right? And so all the little accomplishments that I made, that's exactly right. I had it in my head that I was able to achieve this, you know, I'm some kind of Superman, you know, and, but it's just not the case. And I brought these with me. And then, so, but here's the thing that hit me the hardest when I went to prison. As I'm noticing these things, I'm seeing similar behavior patterns,
right,
in people. And wouldn't you know it, the vast majority of people in prison suffer from a mental health challenge. And it's almost always, and I've done the studies, I've done the, not the studies, but I've done the reading and done the work and the research. It's almost always a trauma piece behind it. The same thing that leads to addiction, you know? And so when you I had these preconceived notions, and this might sound shocking, all right? Because I am telling on myself right now, you know, I had preconceived notions underlying. I wouldn't yell them to the world, right? But inside that, you know, Black people were more dangerous, not as trustworthy. People of color weren't as smart as white people, you know, that if they had only tried harder, you know, and it breaks my heart to say this now, you know, because think of it, those are decades I carried that shit, you know, and it's wrong, you know, and so I had these preconceived notions, but here's the thing, I didn't grow up in a typically racist family. Right. You know, my dad was an Irish kid from the Bronx, you know, he wasn't, you know, he didn't come over from Ireland, you know, and so it wasn't, he was like, you know, if you ever said derogatory slur, or if you ever bashed, you know, homosexuals or, you know, gay people, LGBTQIA, you know, you get hammered for that. If you put somebody down because you didn't think they had a good enough job. So what I'm saying is I grew up in a fairly balanced upbringing, and I still took those away. So if I didn't get them from my family, where did I get them from? You know, and it sounds anecdotal, but there's studies that show that the messages we receive about races, our own race and other races, is part of a system. And we still, like, we understand that, right? Because we're thinking people and we're progressive and, you know, that sort of thing. But there's a whole mass of people that don't see it that way still to this day. And so I did grow up with those biases. And when I noticed what I would notice as an observer, what I noticed in prison, it really changed my thinking. And Kenny helped me along that way in making those connections and really challenging myself.
right. I will say, I think, you know, like as I'm hearing both of you talk, you know, I think that's what makes this situation right now so interesting, is all of the intersectional factors that you're mentioning, right? You're not even just saying that this is just a race issue, but this is a class issue, a socioeconomic issue. This is, and Penny was mentioning it earlier, of just having a disability, whether that's a physical ailment, whether that's a mental health ailment. So it's just interesting and fascinating to hear both of you gentlemen speak, because, you know, I think one of the most fascinating things about this story itself is to be able to break down how race was in, how it was a contributing factor to what you both experienced it in the judicial or in the criminal justice system, as well as into the reentry system. But what, it's so much more than that. And I think you two are just like bringing out, you know, that there are so many more factors that play into people's lives. To kind of go more into, you know, the stereotypes and these biases that we have, talk a little bit about what are the let's identify some of the unconscious biases that, maybe general people in society like you, Andrew, you had these preconceived ideas based off of what the system kind of taught you, but what are the same unconscious biases that you two gentlemen think that the outside people have about people with a criminal background, or that people that have been to prison?
Well, again, there's going to be a divide there. Right?
Yep.
These
That's what's interesting, and I can't wait to hear it.
Exist, all the way in every system.
Mm-hmm.
So the struggle for me is different than the struggle for Andrew.
Yep.
The biases, it's just totally different what I'm up against and what he's up against, given the same circumstances of being released from a jail, right? Because the circumstances of how we got there and the time that we got and the cases, they were completely different, right? Mm-hmm. And they were only separated by race. That's it. There's nothing else that separates that. It's just, well, he's white and I'm black, right? Mm-hmm. Because he pled guilty to 6 banks robberies, right? And he had never been in any trouble, had never been to prison. Well, neither had I, right? And I went to trial on 1 bank robbery, mm-hmm. right? Well, they let him get 6.5 years for his 6 bank robberies, right? And they gave me 10 years for the one that I was found guilty of after the second trial. Because in the first trial, there was 1 juror who refused to vote for not guilty. So they said, well, we'll try you again, right? And they did, and found me guilty the second time. And 10 years, right? So we start off different, right? Mm-hmm. With him going 6.5 years, right? And they ship him off to a place that's more suitable for him, right? Because they know he's white, he haven't been in much trouble, right? So they want to protect him there, right? So they send him to the place that's more suitable for guys like him, right? And they send me to the place that's more suitable for guys like me. It's rougher there, right? Where they send us. It's worse there, right? Only we end up at the same place together because I took a religious program. Otherwise, I would have never met him, because they don't let guys like me even go to that prison, right? It's mostly white guys there, right? And they did other kind of crimes than what we did, or they get special privileges because they're white. In the same way, when we finally do our time and we got out, right? Time for us to be released. Well, he gets to go in a different direction than I go. I go to back where I came from, which is nothing, right? He's on a path of rehabilitation. It has a true meaning for Andrew. Rehabilitate. He was something before. He was a federal prosecutor and a Marine, right? And he has a family upstanding. He was something that he could return to. But me, right? See, I got to go over back to the hood from whence I came, right? Because there's no rehabilitation for me, because I've never been habilitated. I've never had nothing to start with, neither my mother or her mother and her mother's mother, all the way back till you can get to a slave ship. We've never had nothing to have to be rehabilitated to. So that path is completely different, right? Mm-hmm. And those biases are completely different. He has to face some things because he does have a background. And it is tough for him, right? Because of his background. But it's different because my black skin precedes me before I even get to say a word out of my mouth, right? And that is an impediment to whatever that I'm trying to do at that time. And Drew can speak to that same thing.
Absolutely. So when you meet with your case manager and they're planning your discharge, for somebody, and I'm not going to say for all whites, but if what Kenny just described about me is absolutely right. You know, I had the education under my belt. I think in their eyes, they thought I was a better risk. In fact, Kenny, I don't know if you know this, they didn't even want me to go to halfway house. They said, go directly home. And it wasn't until I got in the fight the last 2 months I was there that I lost that. They didn't even want me to go to halfway house. They said, you can bypass it and go do your 6 months of halfway house time on home confinement. And that's because of what I had. And what I had was, yes, the education and the family. But what I really had was I was white. Now, no one said that to me specifically. And but it was so implied in our conversations, that if circumstances were different, Andrew, we don't offer this to everybody, and I'm a prisoner, I'm not supposed to be taking favors from staff. I said, well, you treat me like you treat everybody else, knowing full well that they were going to treat me like a white guy with an education.
Exactly.
Not going back to the hood, going back to the suburbs, or going back to a borough in New York City. So that's a completely different animal. And I'll add this too, the treatment, and this blew my mind. And I think there's a thesis, like a master's thesis in here somewhere. Okay. Mm-hmm. The treatment that white inmates get in prison is better than the treatment that than black inmates get in prison.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's even when the corrections officers are predominantly black, like they were at Petersburg, FCI Petersburg outside of Richmond. I came from FCI Elkton, which is a white prison. It's supposed to be a white prison for troublemakers, but whatever, it didn't matter. Mm-hmm. The treatment's different. Their perception, and I'm not in Kenny's skin. I'm not in Kenny's shoes, but he has a way of imparting the experience. And for a person to have to deal with that, they've already put you away. They've already warehoused you. Chances are, maybe an unfair sentence, mm-hmm. And like Kenny got compared to my sentence. I should have done 3 times as much as what Kenny did. But the point is to have to face that. You've already warehoused me through mass incarceration, and now you're going to treat me differently based on the color of my skin. Even in the case where the warden's skin is the same as Kenny's or the CO's. Okay, that's not even talking about racist COs. That's a whole nother ballgame, and that goes both ways as well. Slightly different degree, but it happens. But the point is that it opened my eyes to so many things, and then seeing people come out, I knew, it wasn't easy, but Kenny said, I know there were times it was hard for Andrew. I'm here to tell you it was not. And that makes me sad in a sense. Believe me, I'm not saying, people say, well, you must feel good that you got an advantage. Nah, not really. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say I didn't work my ass off in law school, but I had the opportunity to go to law school. People didn't look at me like, well, why would you apply to law school? Or, the same pressures that non-whites get trying to get, ahead and get an education, all those other things, and I'm rambling here a bit, but I'm going to wrap it. I'll tie this back in, Jasmine, I promise. What it comes down to is I come out and the opportunities are there. Yeah, I get, there's some people that treat me differently, because of my criminal record, what I did for that is I led with it. I wrote the book and I said, if I'm going to make an impact, the book's not about robbery. The book is not about crime. It's about growing up with untreated depression and addiction and really that disability, right. And where that can lead to untreated. Mm-hmm. But if I hadn't done that, if I hadn't led with it, if I had to try to hide it, or if I didn't have a gazillion opportunities when I got out, mm-hmm. then I'd be on the street.
I honestly, like, hearing both of you just share your individual stories definitely gives me chills. And I think one of the things that I'm thinking about the most is actually a conversation me and Kenny had offline. He brought this up to me, and I think I'll always have it ingrained into my head. But from the sounds of it, society has always given you boots, Andrew, you know, before you went to prison, even in prison and being re-entered the society, you always had boots, you always had access to those resources in order to pull yourself up. But what me and Kenny have definitely talked about, and I know what he's, you know, talked on today, is how can you expect, you know, because both of you were in and when I say similar situation, I think I'm saying as far as like re-entering into society, being prison. But so essentially you got in the same kind of boat. But for Kenny, it's always been, he didn't start off with boots, you know, before he went to prison. And he didn't have boots in prison. He didn't have boots coming or going back into society. So it's super interesting to hear. And when I say it, I don't think it's a shocker to anyone on the call that, you know, these are different, but I think it's really important that all of us recognize our privilege, even white passing privilege. If you don't identify, you do have white skin, such as like you have to identify that white privilege, especially when you're telling your story, because you have to. One is just going to come to do that when providing these place. So power is to be able to provide.
Jasmine, I don't know about anybody else, but you're breaking up. Yeah. And while you're breaking up, I do have one comment I'm going to make while you're breaking up, and you're going to redo it. She's going to come back and join us. I know her quite well, but it's been fascinating, Kenny and Andrew, listening to your stories. I've been chomping at the bit to like say a comment. And Kenny, I know your story because, you know, I'm a sister, right? But actually my life is more like Andrew's than it is like yours. And it's kind of strange because if I committed his crime, I guarantee you I have enough money where I get 65 months, dude. And I meet you there. And that's why it's, to me, racism has become such this huge word, particularly after George Floyd, that we all saw get murdered on TV, that I think is too big of a word because I do think it's socioeconomic. I do think it's more that than anything. Andrew grew up relatively well off, and Kenny, it sounds like your situation was different. And now Jasmine's back. Jasmine, I've been holding the floor for you, sweetheart. You know that's what I do.
Thank you, Jill. I am so sorry, y'all. This is why Spectrum, they're going to get a nasty letter from me. No, totally kidding. But I know we are coming up at a little bit of time. I don't know if anyone heard actually what I was saying, but essentially what I wanted to give gratitude towards Kenny is just providing boots to those that society has failed to give boots to. So Kenny, I do want to applaud you for just serving the community in a way that a lot of people just don't have it in them to do. So thank you, Kenny, for doing that. Because we have 7 minutes left, if you guys do have questions, feel free to jump in. But Kenny and Andrew, what is a piece of advice that you have to someone either that has been in your shoes, or maybe that hasn't even been in your shoes, but just general, feedback that you have to people, about just, because I think both of you are perfect examples of second chances and turning your lives around. So what advice do you have to give to people to not give up, to keep grinding and just turn your life around?
Well, you can look at us and get, it's nothing better than seeing something with your own eyes that's real, right? Mm-hmm. And seeing the work that's real. But for those that's on this call, which we don't normally have access to this audience, right? So we encourage everyone here to, think about some of the things that we said and look at, us and our opportunities in a different way, right? Because for a lot of these different businesses and corporations now, right? Well, I am employable now, right? I know what to say, right? I could put on a suit and cut my hair and all of that stuff and get the job, right? I probably could get a reference. Dan will give me a reference if I ask him. Dan, I'm looking for a job. Can you help me? He'll do that now, right? So I want this audience to start looking at my peers, right? As such, don't look at me and make a determination that I can be a flagger or that I can do construction, never even speaking to me. I'm not interested in that. In fact, I'm interested in cryptocurrencies. In fact, I'm interested in banking. In fact, I'm interested in art, right? But if you don't have that conversation with me, then you will deem me the janitor, right? Or something based off of my hair, my skin complexion, and on those kind of things. So that's just what we need from this audience, right? Who are in a position to change lives, right? With their tongue, right? With their mouth, right?
Right.
With their fingers. They can text this over to someone and change somebody's life. And that's the only thing that we asking for. And if you have some problems digesting the person and their background, then just think about me, right? And my background and how I was able to do it. And think about Andrew and how he was able to do it. And maybe give somebody a shot. That is what we're always hoping when we tell the story, that someone else can get a shot, right? Like Andrew said, he had an opportunity to go to law school. We don't want you to give us the law degree. Just give me an opportunity to be able to earn it myself.
Right.
And those
My
are
message,
my words.
My message, in addition to what Kenny said, is number one, anybody on the call, Jasmine, please feel free to share my direct information with them if they want to pick my brain at all about what they might be thinking. And what I would say is this, is that, you know, we're getting to the point, I'm starting to see a little bit of a sea shift, especially among corporations, business owners. I work, a lot of my friends are business owners and, C-level executives and that kind of thing. But what we need to do is move from where we're talking about it to actually doing what Kenny just said, is looking beyond the stereotype, our internal belief system, giving somebody that opportunity, giving somebody that 10-minute phone call, giving somebody that 10 minutes in front of you, and use the gifts that you were given and bestowed or were somehow privileged to have. And when we talk about privilege, we are not saying, we're not taking away how hard you worked to get where you are if you're white. Okay. I envy the guys that can get into Harvard because their parents went to Harvard, and I can't get into Harvard because mine did. Okay. So there's all this degree of privilege and envy, but what we're talking about between black and white are two completely separate things. Give that person that opportunity. Use what was given to you, pass it on, because this is our time. This is our time where we can make a difference. And I follow Kenny's lead, and he provides me with guidance and mentorship, what I can do in New York City, how I can approach my friends. We need to do fundraising. We need to make sure that whatever funds are raised, and I know Kenny does this very carefully, very careful about where the funds are placed. Mm-hmm. And the more people that we can help, especially the people coming out, recidivism, if you're a fiscal conservative, spend the money on the front end. Let's provide people the opportunity to not have to choose to survive in a field with might get them reincarcerated. 65% in the feds, 45% in the states. We're not giving people opportunities to learn anything, to move on and improve their lives. There's hope. And Jasmine, please share my contact information. I'm happy to talk to anybody on this call.
Most definitely. And there is one note that I do want to add off of what Kenny said. I think what's important about, thinking about the unconscious biases that you may have onto someone else. And I think when you are so willing and it's so easy for you to be able to project those feelings onto someone else, I think that is a direct reflection on how impressionable society was on you, not how the other person was on you. So I just challenge everyone that may still have unconscious biases about other people to just ask yourself, well, why do I think this way? Is it because the system taught me to feel this way, or because do I have a legitimate answer? So I challenge all of you to unpack your unconscious biases and to consciously start becoming more unbiased. So gentlemen, Kenny, Andrew, you guys, I love talking to you. Every time we have conversations, you guys give me chills and I learn something new every time. So I really enjoyed today's session. I'm so grateful that all of you were able to join us as well. If you are interested to get in touch with Kenny or Andrew, or you just want to learn more in general about the Freedom Fighting Missionaries, feel free to reach out to myself and I will always put you in the right direction. So with all of that said, thank you again, gentlemen, for joining us. Thank you again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you,
me.
everyone.
Guys, great job. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Great conversation.
Really was.